of a successful church is not really what we often think it is. A lot of times people, when they say, you know, what church you go to, and people want to know about the church you go to, we think about it in terms of how much the budget is, or how many people attend, or how big the building is, or how many programs are offered. But I want to tell you this morning that really and truly the marker, the scorecard for a truly successful church is whether or not the people of that church follow Jesus. And following Jesus is following the pathway that He laid for us. And that pathway is this. Jesus said, if anybody would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. So you see, the pathway of life that Jesus is calling us to follow Him, is the path of service. So the true mark of a successful church is how many people are devoting themselves, giving their lives sacrificially to serve God and serve Christ. And so we've got a lot of people here in this church that are doing that. And to me, that's the mark of a successful church. Well, you know, as was mentioned in the prayer a minute ago, Brother Dave Edwards is in Nepal encouraging the Christians there. The Hagewoods are getting ready to go back to Brazil, and they were missionaries in Brazil about 15 years, I think that's right. How many? 24. Okay, 24 years. They're getting ready to go back and encourage the Christians there, and our prayers go with you as you do that. And we've got so many people that are giving themselves not just to foreign mission efforts, but to local efforts here at home in starting discipleship groups or looking for ways to serve their neighbors or to give back, to help people. You see, this is the life Jesus called us to, is the life of service. And so we're doubling down on that. Because you see, here at Northside, we believe that the mission that Jesus calls us to is discipleship, is to follow Christ, to give our lives sacrificially and to serve in sacrificial ways. See, when we know God and we love each other, it moves us to serve our neighbors. And that's what we're all about here at Northside. Well, the pandemic gave us a real favor. Now, there were lots of struggles with the pandemic, but one of the real blessings that came out of the pandemic is the slowdown provided us a tremendous opportunity, and churches everywhere that would take advantage of it. It provided us the opportunity to stop and evaluate everything we're doing as a church. So I want to give you a little bit of a bit of a review and summary of what's been happening behind the scenes for over a year. We have, as a leadership team, the shepherds, the ministers, the staff, we have been collectively praying over and asking God's guidance, and we've been planning for what we can do to renovate our efforts to serve well from this place, to mobilize the people of this church to serve Christ in a tremendous way, and to go out and to be impactful in kingdom efforts. And so today is the culmination of all of that planning as we're launching out on this effort to serve. We're taking a break today from our series in 1 Peter, and we'll return there, God willing, next Sunday. But today is all about our ministry leaders and appointing those ministry leaders. And the focus of the sermon this morning is not just directed toward the ministry leaders, but it is directed toward all of us. Because again, we are all called to be servants, especially those that are our lead servants among us. So I want to talk to you for the next few minutes about what are the characteristics of a servant. And secondly, what is the calling that our lead servants are being given today as they're being appointed to lead ministries here at Northside. You know, it's easy for you and me to lose our focus whenever it comes to the manner of life that God has called us to. We can become so distracted and involved in so many different things that we forget what it's really all about. The Christian life is really, as I mentioned a moment ago, what Jesus calls you and me to is a lifestyle that says, I will choose of my own free will to deny myself, to take up my cross, the cross of Christ, and to follow after Him. What does that mean? It means that I have to make a choice. And you have to make a choice. If I'm really following Jesus, to lay aside my self-interest, to crucify my pride, to die to my selfish ambition, and to take on the form of a servant. We are all called to that. So I want to talk to you here about what are the attitudes and the actions that should characterize a servant of Jesus. First of all, servanthood is not about a position. Never was, it never will be. In fact, we're going to look here. I'm going to show you on the screen, highlight a few phrases, but just let me give you the bigger context. In Mark chapter 10, Jesus, we talked about this in the upper room Wednesday night. I want to touch on it here now. Jesus, in Mark 10, is bearing his heart before his disciples. And he tells them with great emotion, with great heartbreak, the Son of Man is about to be betrayed. And he's going to be crucified. But he's going to be raised on the third day. In the midst of him bearing his heart about what he's about to have to go through, two of his disciples come up to him and say, Master, when you come in your kingdom, can you give us places of position? Can you put us on your right hand and on your left hand? And Jesus almost, you sense in his compassion, but also some exasperation, he says, are you able to drink the cup of suffering that I'm about to drink from? Are you able to be baptized into the pain that I'm about to be baptized into? He says, you will be. But then he says, let me tell you a little something about what greatness is about. If you're so concerned about prestige and positions, let me tell you what true greatness is. Jesus says this in verse number 43. Whoever wants to be a leader, some translations will render it, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. Jesus even goes one step further and says, I'm not just telling you this. The Son of Man came to do this. He says, I came to this world not to be served, but to serve. Jesus blazed the trail of what this life that we say we live is supposed to be. He says, let me show you. It is a life of service. It's not about positions. It's not about accolades. It's not about titles. It's about humbling yourself to be willing to serve. And friends, that is the lifestyle that Jesus calls all of us to. So it's not about position, but it is about prioritizing others over yourself. Paul would write this regarding Jesus in Philippians chapter 2. He would say, if you really understand what this is all about, if there's any consolation in Christ, if there's any fellowship of the Holy Spirit, if you really understand what this Christian lifestyle is all about, he says, let me tell you, look to Jesus and see the life played out that you're to embrace. Have this mind in you that was also in Christ Jesus, who although he was in the form of God, did not think of himself in that position as something to be held on to, but he emptied himself. He humbled himself to take on the form of a servant. And he says, you're to have that same kind of mind. In fact, in verses 3 and 4, he says, be humble, thinking of others better than yourselves. You must have the same attitude that Christ had. You see, servanthood is not about position. It is about recognizing others as more important than yourself. And then thirdly, servants are called to have a certain kind of attitude. Paul in Ephesians chapter 4, He's talking about the workings of the church and how the church really is to be successful. How can a church grow in the way that God would want it to grow? How can it really thrive and be the kind of successful church that would honor God and expand the influence of the kingdom? And he says in Ephesians 4, therefore, Paul writes, I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you to lead a life that is worthy of your calling. He says you need to live a certain kind of life, one that is worthy of your calling. What have you been called to? You've been called to follow Jesus, to follow the lifestyle of a servant. He says live worthy of that, for you have been chosen. You have been called by God. So then the question, is before us. If we're called to follow in Jesus' steps as servants, what does that practically look like? It means that we position ourselves with a certain attitude, first and foremost. Listen to what he says in verse 2. Always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love. He says then, make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. Now let me just notice for you several things here. He's saying, listen, if the church is going to be successful, and we're going to make ourselves available for God's use to do great things in this world, we have to, brothers and sisters, have the right attitude toward each other. Because if we don't have the right attitude toward each other, we'll end up being jealous of each other, backbiting one another, gossiping about one another, and it will destroy the fabric of what the church is supposed to be. So if we're going to be impactful, we have to start with checking our attitudes toward each other and toward one another in our service efforts. We need to be humble toward each other. We need to be gentle with each other. We need to be patient with one another. And we need to make allowances for each other's faults. And then, you see, we can remember what it's all about, and what the focus really is supposed to be is it's not about me, it's not about you, it's about us together. And we need to make every effort to stay united together in the purpose that Christ called us to. So, with that kind of background and understanding, let me just summarize it this way before we move to the next point. Every follower of Jesus Christ is called to be a servant. Every one of us. What does that mean? It means that you make the conscious decision to seek the well-being of others before yourself. That's what a servant is. And for our ministry efforts at Northside to thrive and flourish the way we want to see them thrive and flourish, we absolutely have to be united together in a spirit of humility and service. Now, through our prayers and fasting as a church, starting back in February, we challenged the church, and the leaders committed themselves to this, the shepherds, the staff, the ministers, to a season of prayer and fasting where we asked God, make us servants. But not only that, we ask that you raise up some lead servants. Some people that you would raise up because of the character of their lives and because of the gifting that you have put inside of them. Lord, would you raise up some leaders to lead us in service, to organize the servant efforts of the entire church so that we can be more effective in our efforts to glorify Christ and to be on mission for Him. And I want to tell you that as we entered into that time of prayer and fasting, it became abundantly clear that God was leading us. And we were surrendering to His leading. And so what we did, as you well know, is that we presented to the congregation, following the Acts chapter 6 model, a nomination form. And we asked you, before you nominate anybody to a position of being one of our ministry servants or ministry leaders or lead servants, before you nominate anybody, go to God, pray and fast. and ask God to lead you to the names of individuals. And so we went through that process, and it became clear as we got those results back that we here at Northside are blessed with an abundance of prospective servant leaders. We have a tremendous number of people that are great prospective leaders in these areas. So let me give you a glimpse as to how we handled it. We took all the nomination forms that you gave us, and we looked at them and we said, you know what? We feel confident in these names. Why? Because this was not a popularity contest. It was not something based on personality, but instead we challenged the church. Don't just give us names that come to your mind. You ask God to give you names. So we're following the leading of God. And so we looked at those names, we put them on a spreadsheet list, and we saw the number of, with all 10 vacant areas of ministry leadership, what are the names that were nominated the most? And so we started with those, and we went to those individuals, and we said, the congregation has nominated you for this particular area, for every one of the 10 areas. We want you to pray about and ask God if God is leading you into this area of ministry leadership. Don't tell us yet. You pray about it. And then we circled back to them and we asked them, what do you feel like? Do you feel like that you're being led to this or not? Many of those individuals, after spending time in prayer, said, I feel like God is leading me to this. And they were humbled by it. They were excited about it and passionate about how they wanted to be used by God moving right time. I don't feel like God is leading me to this particular area. We respected that, and then we moved down the list to the next individual that was nominated the most. Now, I'll tell you that of all of those people, there are many individuals that were nominated by the church that were not nominated at the top of the list, but had received many nominations that are tremendous prospects. And we look forward to the time in the future as our ministry grows to adding even more individuals to ministry leadership. But we have an abundance of prospective servant leaders. It reminds me of what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Whenever he writes about the churches in Macedonia, and he says, we challenge the church in Macedonia to give toward an effort to help some struggling Christians. And he said, not only did they gave more than we'd even hoped for, but what they did was, before they even gave anything monetarily, they gave themselves first to the Lord, just as God wanted them to do. So we have a lot of people here that have tremendous talents, tremendous capabilities, and we're so thankful. And we just want to encourage everybody to get behind what we're doing and find the way in which you can, in humble service, contribute toward the work here at Northside. So we pursued the Lord's process, the Lord's wisdom in this process. And when I say we pursued the Lord's wisdom, you know, it's kind of a hard thing, because in a lot of organizations, when it comes to trying to create any kind of structure or system to help move things forward, you think about at work. At work, maybe you think, boy, I may be up for a promotion. And you get real excited because you're qualified for it. And the next thing you know, you haven't even been asked, but there's been somebody that was maybe the nephew of the boss that gets the job. Because it was like a good old boy system, or it was a process where somebody higher up chose who they liked or who they wanted. We didn't want to fall victim to that here at Northside. We said, you know what? We don't want to choose who the ministry leaders are. We want God to raise them up. So we challenged the church to pray and fast. The leaders devoted themselves to prayer and fasting. And we said, Lord, give us your wisdom about who it is that you at this moment in time want to lead these ministries. Because it might be not somebody that I would pick or expect, but I don't want who I would pick or expect. I want who God is raising up. And so we sought the Lord's process and tried to put into place a mechanism where we could be receptive to God leading us in that area. And so we pursued the Lord's wisdom throughout, and here's how we did it. Let me share with you from James chapter number 3. Listen to this very, very closely. If you are wise and understand God's ways, prove it by living an honorable life, doing good works, with the humility that comes from wisdom. Now let me stop there just a moment. Again, the key to all of us being servants that Christ is calling us to is we have to humble ourselves. And if we're going to seek God's wisdom for the way we pursue our lives or pursue our ministries or try to operate as a church, we have to first humble ourselves and seek His counsel, seek His wisdom. Verse number 14 says, "But if you are bitterly jealous and there is selfish ambition in your heart, don't cover up the truth with boasting and lying. For jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and demonic." Let me stop there a moment. Did you hear that? You do know we have an enemy. You do know that we are fighting a spiritual warfare. And I'm going to tell you what, it's ground zero right here. Let me tell you why. Because churches that are asleep, churches that are apathetic, churches that are complacent, churches that are satisfied to continue to do the same old thing they've always done and be just as ineffective as they've always been, Satan leaves them alone. But churches that are wanting to do great things for God, churches that are wanting to celebrate Christ, churches that are wanting to present themselves open to the movement of the Holy Spirit, Satan is going to try to come after us. And how does he come after us? He sends the forces of his demonic agents. And you say, what does his demonic agents do? They try to plant jealousy and selfish ambition in our hearts, try to set us against each other. You see, that's not the wisdom of God. That is an earthly, unspiritual, and demonic kind of thinking. Verse number 16 says, wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind. It breaks my heart to look across our community, across our city, across this nation and the world, and see how that it seems like in so many different places the evils of this world seem to be winning the battles, and the church seems to be ineffective and anemic and not powerfully working in this world. And you say, well, why is that happening? The reason it's happening is so often there is jealousy and selfish ambition in the midst of God's people. And he says, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind. If we're going to remain united together in this common goal, we have to celebrate what God is, humble ourselves and say, it's not about me, it's about what God is doing. And when God is working in somebody's life, when God is raising up a leader, I'm going to support them, I'm going to celebrate them, I'm going to come alongside of them and help them in any way that I can. It's not about position, it's not about prestige, it's about humbling ourselves and glorifying Christ. So we sought the wisdom of God in that. Now listen to this wisdom that he says in verse number 17. But the wisdom from above is first of all pure. That's right. Let me stop here just a moment, just as a side note that applies to just your general life as an individual. You know, many times we often are facing situations in life and we're trying to discern what is God's will. Should I do this? Should I do that? What is God's purpose for me? How do you know when you're trying to discern the will of God, what is really the wisdom of God? He gives us markers to look for. He says the wisdom that is from above is first of all pure. It is peace-loving and gentle at all times and willing to yield to others. When somebody comes up to you and they try to give you some advice, always consider the source. You see, if somebody comes up to you and says, this is what you ought to do or what you should do, and they're being real kind of aggressive about it, they're not being pure, they're not being gentle, they're not being peace-loving, they're not willing to yield, that's not the wisdom from above. Wisdom from above, when somebody is giving you the wisdom of God, it will have these traits. Did you hear that? Peace-loving, gentle at all times, and willing, hear me church, willing to yield to others. It is full of mercy and the fruit of good deeds. It shows no favoritism and is always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. So you see, pursuing the Lord's wisdom was realizing that if we're going to be involved in good works, we have to be humble about it. We can't have jealousy and selfish ambition because that's where disorder and evil is found. But instead we seek God's wisdom and being gentle and peace-loving and willing to yield to others. So what we're asking all of you as a church is we ask you to support our lead servants. Today we're appointing these lead servants and we're asking you to support them, to encourage them, to pray for them, to come alongside and say, what can I do to help your ministry? Because you see, these lead servants, we're going to be asking them to be building teams of people, teams of volunteers that come alongside and help them to be successful in their areas. So I want to present to you now the results of this entire process that we've prayed over and sought God's wisdom about. The ministry leaders that we now are presenting to you at Northside that will be leading these particular areas. We've got several that have been existing ministry leaders, and then the 10 new appointees that today, during a luncheon, the shepherds are going to be praying over and commissioning them to their new ministries. So here's the entire list. Of course, over our worship team is Kenny Wyatt, who's responsible in his ministry work here to lead us in worship every Sunday. Our audio-visual team is Carrie Wyatt and Taylor Atkins. Carrie's responsible for the operational work in the booth, and Taylor comes alongside helping with all the technical needs for the booth. Our guest services, or maybe better yet put, our hospitality team to welcome people into to build a team of individuals that make sure we have a welcoming environment in our foyer, to also help our guests to understand where things are and try to get them involved at Northside. Gene Hooper is our new ministry leader over our hospitality team, guest services. Over life groups, which is a revisioning of our Sunday adult Bible classes, which align all of our efforts as a church around our ministry vision, is Avery Casey. Of course, our children's group is led by Megan Swanner, who has done such a phenomenal job in growing that ministry, continues to be passionate about that, as well as Chris Gannon over our youth group. If you've got kids in between 7th grade and 12th grade, you need to know Chris, and you need to be involved in that youth effort ministry. And then we've got our meal ministry, Deb Flowers. She leads a team of volunteers to help provide meals for members and attenders in times of need. And then, of course, our prayer ministry. Mickey Perry was nominated as and is going to be appointed today as our leader over our prayer ministry. The front line of our work here at Northside has to begin with prayer, and she's got lots of great help alongside of her in this effort. Our handyman ministry, Dwight Sessler, will be our leader over handyman ministry. You say, what's handyman ministry? It's a ministry that helps with repairs and projects around the house, especially with our senior citizens, widows, and people with physical handicaps. Our widows and confined to home ministry, Bess Mitchell, is going to be leading that effort. You know, the early church saw that there was a need to make sure to take care of those that had trouble in a stage of life in taking care of their own needs. And so the early church in Acts 6 made sure to appoint ministry leaders over that area. Bess Mitchell will be coordinating that here at Northside. Our fellowship ministry, a vital part of that work here at Northside. Wow, we have skipped all the way to the end of the entire slideshow. If you want to go back to fellowship ministry, there we go. Our fellowship ministry is an important and vital part of the work here because it's a way that we help to love each other, and be involved with one another in a community of faith here at Northside. Pam Dickens is our ministry leader over fellowship. Our building maintenance team to make sure we continue to have the facilities here to meet together and to do all of this ministry. Doug Strange is going to be caring for the physical maintenance of the church building. And then, of course, to make sure that we have great facilities, we need someone, and Jason Hooper is that individual, to maintain church property and grounds. And he's got others that are working alongside of him. Tim Dickens, for years, has been so faithful to help us with our mowing and trimming outside, and he'll be working alongside and helping with Jason. But Jason is the ministry leader over grounds upkeep. And then our safety team, Brian Eaton, provides for and helps with a team of volunteers to provide for the physical and emotional security of our members and guests as we're attending here at the facility. Transportation team, Robert Quillen is going to be providing this service where he is helping those that might need a help with rides to the church building, especially our seniors or others that are interested in attending church services and functions and need a ride. We've got vehicles here that can be used and need to be maintained, and he'll be working to help maintain those vehicles as well. Charlie Hooks is, of course, our budget and finance coordinator, who's responsible for the conduct of our church finances and the proper handling and accounting of our church funds. Our food pantry is going to be led by Laura Sellers. It has been for some time, and she's continuing that work. She's active in providing those resources for those that, for whatever reason, find themselves without enough food to eat. We want to make sure and have that resource available for them. Our benevolence ministry, Faye Sessler, is going to be the ministry leader there. She's going to be helping to provide financial and material assistance to families and individuals in times of crisis, especially with priority placed upon our church family members. And then, of course, our counseling services. John Kennedy is launched to great success our counseling center just across the way over here. And that has started the beginning of the month and is already off to a great start with many people utilizing those services as he's here one day a week providing those counseling services. Hope to perhaps add another day very soon. Discipleship training. Yours truly is involved with coordinating that. That has to do with our Wednesday night upper room to train individuals to be able to do discipleship and disciple making. We're going to continue to put an emphasis on that here at Northside. And along discipleship has to do with discipleship mentoring. We continue to support and be involved with Tennessee Prison Outreach Ministry. Jim Pounders is going to be the representative leader for here at Northside. Of course, we've got Thomas Snow, who's intimately involved with TPOM, but Jim Pounders is going to be the representative for Northside in helping to serve men and women who are incarcerated and help with mentoring those individuals. And we've got lots of people that are involved in that work here that Jim helps coordinate. And then we've got discipleship mentoring with CSDN. Brother Major Clay is involved with this ministry. It's a grassroots nonprofit organization that is trying to help at-risk youth in our community. And so we've got him leading this effort here at Northside. So those are our ministry leaders. And so let's give them all a round of applause and thank them so much. We are so excited about what the future holds here at Northside. It's an exciting time at Northside. We're seeing amazing things happen. Why? Because the church is seeking God's wisdom. And we are watching Him raise up humble and passionate servants to lead these efforts. So today, following our life groups, we're going to be having a luncheon especially for all of the ministry leaders and their families that I mentioned, along with the shepherds and staff and ministers. And that luncheon is going to be something that during that time we're going to be able to celebrate them, and we're going to have the shepherds pray over them, respect works. But we're challenging everybody else, all the members at Northside. All of us are called to be servants. And what that means, and what we're challenging you to do, is be different than a lot of people that call themselves Christians are. You know, it's easy in our culture to say you're a Christian just because you go sit in a pew for an hour and a half once a week. But you see, a Christian is a follower of Christ, not just somebody who attends a gathering. A follower of Christ is someone who says, I will humble myself and I will be sacrificial and put the needs of others before myself, and I will serve. So here at Northside, we are going to challenge everybody who is a member here at this church to do is don't come here and just be a consumer. Be a contributor. How are you contributing to the ministry of Northside? Find some way to be involved in a ministry. And we want to challenge you as just a starting place to be involved, every member, be involved in service in some way to give back to the work here at Northside by serving at least 1 hour a week in some way. Find some way to serve at least 1 hour a week toward the work here at Northside. There's a lot, as you've seen today in the description, there are a lot of different ministries that would love to have your help in building that team to help in those areas. There is something for everybody. There is some way you can be involved. And you say, well, how can I learn more? 2 ways. This morning as you leave, we encourage you in the lobby to go by the information desk. And there you will find a little booklet that Megan has worked hard to help me coordinate for today. And that booklet is a ministry directory that has all of this information I've shared with you, ministry descriptions, the pictures of all of the ministry leaders, and contact information. So you can look at that directory and you can contact a ministry leader if you're interested in somehow serving to help in one of these particular areas. Or you can go to the Northside Nashville app. If you don't have our app, go to the App Store, go to the Google Play Store, and type in Northside Nashville, and you will find our app. And when you download our app, you can click the button that says Ministries, and the entire ministry directory is listed for you there with all the descriptions. And with the click of a button, you can send an email to any ministry leader and ask how you can help and get involved.